The deep, the deeper and deeper I go, I find what it is I should know. 'Cause it's just a matter of time that you'll reawaken your mind. Oh, come with me, come to know and find out what is true. Then you'll know what's in store just for you. No more living a lie. I can look to the sky and say, I'm reawakening minds. Come to know and find out what is truth, yes. Then you'll know what's in store just for you. No more living a lie. I can look to the sky and say, I'm reawakening minds.
Happy Holy Day, Moors. Welcome to House of Reawakening Minds. House of Reawakening Minds exists to provide for the exploration and practice of spirituality in an enlightened community dedicated to honoring the myriad of sacred pathways to the universal creator. We are a holistic center for spiritual grounding, free thought, self-discovery, and Moorish science, an awakening experience for all ages. Tonight, I'm pleased to present to you our National Grand Sheik, Taj Tarik Bey, as he presents spotlighting the distinction between the Defacto Democracy and the Dejure Republic. But before he begins, please be sure to like, share, and if you have not already done so, subscribe to our channel. Now, let's receive Grand Sheik Taj Tarik Bey.
Islam, Shalom, Vadi Makum, Assalamu Alaikum. We want to discuss some of the basics of civics activity, particularly at North America. These things that we're discussing now, many of you who listen to this channel and other scholars who deal with civics and politics are already aware of most of what we're talking about. However, the conversation is actually directed to many of the new people who have become conscious of their right of heirship on and to the land at Northwest Mexum, i.e. North America, Central America, South America, and the adjoining islands known as Americana, distinguished from the occupational forces of the Illuminati operations dedicated to the Pope of Rome under the Inquisition operations, etc., known as United States Service Corporation Trading Company, etc., which has been occupying our land for the last couple of hundred years, and whose club membership have been falsely promoting their political occupation platform, the United States Incorporated, falsely as a country, and have successfully not only miseducated the people of the land here for the last few generations, but many people around the world, and have systematically used their political agenda of unum sanctum to use other political jurisdictions and nation states as proxies to carry out their war operations, etc. And so this conversation is generally for those who have been less knowledgeable about what's really going on. And so our general conversation is about the de facto platform known as the United States Corporation Company, etc., distinguished from America and the true Americans, which would include all of the Aboriginal indigenous peoples of the land from the north to the south. And keep in mind, even though very often the territorial jurisdiction of the land, America, is often referred to as two continents, north and south, the fact of the matter is that it is actually one continent. And so be clear on that. So when we're talking about America and Americans, you're talking about the Aboriginal peoples from the north to the south, i.e., from Greenland on down to the tip of Chile, including all of the islands or on the north and the southern half of the equator, which would include all of the islands known as Americana. Now, people who don't know the real history and politics, nor the fundamental issues of in personam jurisdiction, subject matter jurisdiction, and territorial jurisdiction have been deceived in relationship to their position in the social, economic, and political forums, and have been confused about the issues of nationhood, nationality, nativity, citizenship, classification of citizenship, classification of movements of citizenship into different territorial jurisdictions from AA to A1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right on up to 19, etc., dealing with your different political jurisdictions. So write that down because we won't be going into that particular section because of limited time. But keep in mind, these are different classifications of what you would call alien classification for people who are traveling to different political jurisdictions. And that whole area has been deliberately muddied by the occupational forces and persons owning the United States company for the purposes of maintaining forced servitude and occupational operations under the guise of prejudice and racism problems, etc., which is a cover up for the reality and fact that forced servitude has never ended. It was only uh, institutionalized, I would say, intellectually, politically, educationally, socially, etc. And so this is another reason why we're discussing the distinction between the democracy and the republic. Now, keep in mind the principles of the republic as demonstrated or projected for the people who may take any position of authority in government would be directed to you via Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution for the United States. And this is why all persons or people who take a solemn oath to any office in government, etc., from the federal level to the state level to the county level to the city, borough, and township level, all must take a solemn oath to the Constitution for the United States to be qualified to hold any seat or any office of trust. Keep in mind that all political seats in government are offices of trust, and therefore it must be comprehended and understood and understood by all who are listening to this program that these people who are in seats of government have no rights to sell, have no rights to give, and have no rights to own on their own part, for they are essentially trustees in relationship to organized government to serve to protect the pre-existing rights of the humans who are part of the land and or political jurisdictions, which are distinguished and specifically addressed. Now, for those of you who have some limited knowledge as to the obligations of these trustees, I would suggest that you read the Constitution for the United States from top to bottom, break down every section from the operations of the Congress on up to the legislature and to the executive office, as well as to the what you would call a balance dealing with the Supreme Court's obligations to secure any so-called laws that are created by the legislature to make sure that it's in harmony with the Constitution for the United States and that it has no nature of breach or misprision in relationship to the Constitution for the United States, nor any treaties made, which combined comprises the supreme law of the land. And we don't have to argue or even make the issue about the fact that both the treaties and the Constitution for the United States have been severely breached by people who have been, by organizational structure, controlling the seats of government at North America under the guise of nationhood, while in fact actually being or acting as board of governors for the Circle Church and Chancery, and for the operators of the United States Corporation Company, governed from Fleet Street, England, etc., and Davos, Switzerland. That is the fact. And we're quite aware of the fact that many people who should have been telling the people these things quite for decades have been some of the most ardent critics and suppressors of this information, while pretending to be aiding in the great missionary work of helping to uplift fallen humanity, and particularly of the Moorish tribes of the Western Hemisphere, known as the Maghreb, Al-Aqsa, etc., also referred to as so-called Indian tribes, etc., which is why when you're doing your research, you will find that the Moorish tribes, the Moorish treaties, and the Indian treaties are all categorized in the same category when you do research. It is because the Moor is a cover for all of the Asiatic African tribes ancient on the land in the Western Hemisphere, and loosely commonly referred in contemporary times, not in ancient times, but in contemporary times as quote unquote Indian treaties and Indian tribes, etc., to cover up the real dynamics and the real history, which goes back multiple thousands of years, compound thousands of years, in fact, etc., in order to hide the history and to disconnect the people from their rightful estate and tie to the land. And this is, again, why many people are what you would call hostile to anyone that begins to teach the people fundamental civics, because by that, by the principles of civic knowledge, you can vet anyone who claims to have authority over your personage, over your estate, over or having or possessing any capacity of authority to either create legislate or pass any bills or laws operating on the land jurisdiction at North America, etc., Central America, South America, and the adjoining islands. And all of these areas have been areas that have been pretty of information that have been pretty much suppressed in relationship to the educational systems, etc., operating under the General Education Board of John D. Rockefeller and Frederick T. Gates and the foundations following them for generations that have control over the educational systems and the general institutions operating on the land at North America, particularly, which is the heartland of the Moroccan Empire, which has been overthrown under the Unum Sanctum and Doctrine of Discovery operations of the popes of Rome. So they have a motive of the people not knowing the distinction between the private foreign corporation, United States Incorporated, operating at America, distinguished from the states united of the different tribes and confederations of the people of the land, and those who have been in harmony with international law progressions in relationship to those who have been operating honorably in treaty with the people of the land, etc. And those operations comprises the supreme law of the land. And of course, the Republic order that was adopted by those who have been operating in honor of the Honor, Honesty, Confederation principles, and adopted for the operations of the Europeans, hybrid Europeans, doing business with us, with the trade routes over the years, over the century, the last couple centuries, that comprises what is known as the Republic Order, which is why that is established at Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution for the United States, also expressed with the Ordinance of 1787 before the adoption of the Constitution for the United States. This is why people who really know civics know the sequence of events or the timeline of the major treaty, or what you call the mother treaty, although you have small or territorial treaties, etc., of the different provinces, etc. You will commonly hear the Treaty of Peace and Friendship between the Moroccan Empire and the United States, etc. And so people who are not aware would have the concept that the United States operations of trade constitutes a nation state, which is actually not the truth. For the land essentially is Morocco, or Al Marak, etc., Maghreb, also known as America, etc., distinguished from the territories on the east side of the water, the Atlantic, etc. And so that would be the distinction of the Asiatics, Africans, etc., of the West, distinguished from the Asiatic Africans of the East. While we are politically, what you call jurisdictionally, territorially separate, we are by historical bloodline same peoples, etc., or the different tribes of both Bantu, Montu, or Mandinka, etc., and Phoenicia, etc. So all of these people of the Western Hemisphere, etc., that have been tagged as Indians, Moors, etc. Anyone that does any research will find the first peoples who peopled the land, or the most oldest Aboriginal people of the land at North America or at the Americas, etc., are Phoenician people, or what you call the ancient Asiatic African people, which comprises by the different tribes, etc., including the slightly different customs of the different tribes, comprises the Aboriginal indigenous peoples of America, etc. And over the years, over the centuries, and over the decades, um, many of the different territories or tribes of the uh, ancient Moabites here at the north, etc., have been divided by agreeing to be participants in different social constructs created by the hybrid occupational Europeans under the Bureau of Indian Affairs, by which they were tricked into giving up true right of heirship on the land by dividing themselves against the other different tribes, etc., which is why you see a lot of controversy with a lot of the tribes here claiming to be actually separate from each other. And keep in mind that was politically constructed by hybrid Europeans for the purposes of what is known as schism operations under military operations under the doctrine of discovery, divide and conquer. And also you will discover with the different uh, campaigns of both genocide and both land, they would call it annexation, which is actually them stealing land, etc., from the people, etc., why it has been so profitable for them to promote the artificial race issues and problems that they adopted from the phenotype mind control and artificial genetic phenotype structure set up by Carlos Linnaeus and Frederick Johann Blumenbach, and used and weaponized as a social construct tool for justifying the separating of the Aboriginal people from their land and also from their own different tribal brothers and sisters, etc., on the land, which is why you also see so much division among the people of the land, not recognizing themselves as actually being the people of the land, and thinking also or falling for the reconstruction paradigm of what they call the great diaspora, etc., to present in the educational systems that the people were brought here on ships, etc., as opposed to telling the truth that the people have been here for compound thousands of years or for millennia, in fact, etc. This is again why you will often see the scholars always suppressing information and artifacts that absolutely tie the ancient Phoenician tribes to the land, and that they have actually falsely reconstructed the history. Part of that game of operations was to refer or to promote the fiction that our people came here coming across the Barren Straits, i.e., when the land was connected at Alaska area, etc. When the fact of the matter, the people were already here even before the great tectonic shift known as the cocoa plate shift that took place around Central America area, etc., and also referred to by the hybrid Europeans as the Great Continental Shift or drift. And so the dividing of the land relative to the great tectonic shift, etc., uh, is part of the long-term drifting of the continents or the land that create the continents as we know them today. And those who know the history know that the Atlantis was actually a large river before the continental shift. And this is why archaeologists and scientists and geologists are very well aware that the soil, uh, any soil samples taken from the area of the land of flowers that we call Florida area, and any of the soil samples taken from the area that you call the Mediterranean or Tunis, Algeria, Egypt, Hiccuta, etc. area, that the soils are exactly and precisely and scientifically and minerally absolutely the same. For those areas actually at one time were the same area before the shift. And this is again why they don't want the people to know that the ancient Phoenicians actually were already on this side of the land, etc. So this is why, again, many of the politicians and scientists and historians will tell the people that all of the people or the different tribes all originated from Africa, and then politically in modern times actually promote the fiction that they're separate people at the same time. And those who don't know anthropology as a science uh, aren't always able to intellectually make the distinction between what you call pedigree, bloodline history, and what you call political, territorial, jurisdictional history and separations. So where you may call foreign in relationship to territorial jurisdiction is one subject matter in its own right, and the subject matter of pedigree jurisdictions, etc., also referred to loosely as nation or national jurisdictions, is another subject matter in its own right. And people who don't know civics often don't know or are not cognate to make that distinction, and therefore can be caught up into the gray area arguments that are created by the occupational forces of hybrid Europeans and promoted among the Aboriginal peoples in order to call or create what they call military schism operations, commonly referred to as divide and conquer. which is a part of what the people are suffering from in these days. And also, so I'm reminding you all that when you're dealing with some scholars who are more willing to tell the truth about the territorial, political territorial jurisdiction politics and history, they will tell you that the Constitution for the United States, etc., the principles that were adopted, not created by the hybrid Europeans, but adopted from the Honesty Confederation of Moors at North America, etc., also known as or misquoted as the Iroquois or Iroquois, they will say, Confederation, which is really Honesty Confederation, etc. Those principles, which are ancient, were actually adopted by the hybrid Europeans in order for them to have what is called a harmonic governmental structure operating on the land. And also keep in mind that the economic powers and basis of international trade between the nations of the world and of the planet were actually pre-existing for actually centuries, and they were actually taken over by the occupying hybrid Europeans, distinguished from the misinformation or the misconception that the hybrid Europeans that came or who took over America, the misconception that they created these trade routes must be dismissed, and it must be known that all the trade routes were ancient and pre-existing. Sometimes they call it the old, um, the golden trade routes or the golden routes of the Moors, etc., golden age of the Moors, etc., which would include all the trade routes all around the world, and the Silk Road, all those different names that were given to the ancient trade routes, which they have been systematically suppressing ever since the takeover. However, the point that we're making at this particular time is for the people to recognize or to have a concept of mind in relationship to anyone that claims to have authority of operating or executing civil jurisdiction on the land, and know principally that law or the rules of organized government deal with land, air, and water. And so those are the rules of human endeavor, anthropological trade endeavor, and political jurisdiction constructs, etc., operating on the land. And so specifically, the trade routes logically would deal with land and water and air, etc. And this is again why the hybrid Europeans have hidden the history of both air, land, and water travel that is actually ancient. And many of the people in the contemporary or who have been toxified by the contemporary education animal husbandry training systems under the guise of education think that air, land, and water travel and communications is a new paradigm on the earth, when actually it is actually ancient and beyond ancient. And this is why also it has been necessary for the hybrid Europeans to introduce what they refer to as the animal husbandry training systems over the conquered people of America, etc. And this is also why over the decades they have systematically genocided the people, and particularly those who carried the wisdom and the history. And this is also why they set up at different times their different so-called human, you might call relations or family relations institutions under the guise of helping the Aboriginal people, many of whom had become orphans by virtue of the Europeans' high genociding out the parents, etc., and the scientists and the those who held the knowledge, etc., i.e., the Gnostics and the Shakums, etc. So there was a lot of what you would call orphans left, and so they set up the educational system in order to disconnect the heirs from the land mentally, and then executed different operations or agencies to promote misconceptions and disconnects, etc., from which we're suffering now. However, subject matter is the democracy and the republic. And so you will see, set at Article 4, Section 4 for the Constitution for the United States guarantees a Republican form of government for all the states in the Union. And so the states united have a constitution of operations. But the United States Corporation Company, which was actually a cover to cover up the history, which is actually the private corporation, which we've shared with you over the years, even showing you their corporate papers, etc., has been promoted as the country, and they have successfully not only stolen the land from the people, but actually have contaminated the minds of the heirs of the people, both from the capacity of rightful heirship as well as divided them against each other into these tribal Indian game arguments, etc., which also would constitute a disqualification or a non-descendable heirship problem, which is much of what the people are suffering from now. So the republic is the legitimate foundation under which the operations of law would be maintained and secured, and securing the rights of both the hybrid Europeans who would do trade here, as well as determining the form of government that would be operative between themselves and us, the Aboriginal people of the land. And thus, you have set forth in Article 3, Section 1 and Section 2, the political jurisdictions relative to any controversies relative to trade, etc., and to rights of estate or properties, uh, dealing with both the people who are aboriginal to the land, and i.e., the people who, under international law, would be what you call temporary visitors to the land, or what you call the alien jurisdictions. And this is why you have in the issues of citizenship the classifications from double A to A1 to 19, which would make those clarifications. However, those principles have been breached deliberately in order for the fictional promotion of the corporate members of the occupying forces to breach their obligations of treaty and the Constitution and actually usurp the land, etc., or the rights of heirship from the people. And this is why you won't see many of the politicians admitting or telling the truth or promoting the fact of the obligations of anyone holding any seat of trust to take an oath, a solemn oath to support the Constitution for the United States, because it includes their obligation to secure the rights of the Aboriginal people, which supersedes that Constitution, i.e., Ordinance of 1787, etc., and the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, 1786, 87, etc. And the only alteration that have been made in those obligations was the first and only convention in relationship to the constitutional obligations, and that would be the succeeding obligation or superseding obligations of 1836, and that was the only constitutional convention dealing with any alteration of the supreme law of the land, i.e., Treaty of Peace and Friendship, 1836, superseding the Treaty of 1787. None of the law have changed, and thus their constitutional obligation to support and to enforce that constitution has not changed. And therefore, since there's been no change, etc., there's been no constitutional convention, any laws or legislation that has been created by them under any circumstance or by any year or by any political body that in any manner contradicts or goes against or convolutes whatsoever the existing law supreme of the land constitutes misprision of treason and constitutes treason and is indeed not the law but color of law. And any man or woman or anyone claiming any authority whatsoever in any seat of government, etc., thereafter, etc., is in fact an act of treason. The office is a color of office. Any legislation is a color of law. Any execution of authority is a color of authority. And this is the distinction that should be made by all who comprehend or know the real history and know that any legislation made particularly by a persons who claiming to be legislatures, etc., or claiming to be lawyers or esquire or attorneys, etc., or takes any title of nobility, etc., that they are in fact in violation of the Constitution and thus in violation of treaty. And logically, all of those things have occurred. And this is where we are today with the de facto platform known as the U.S. democracy that came out in the open or from undercover February the 2nd, 1871, known as the Act of Congress, the Organic Act of Congress, 1871, which is also known the Act of Great Britain, 1871, which is the same political platform. And that constitutes the de facto misprision operations of the U.S. corporate democracy. And this is why it has been necessary over the decades for them to promote the misinformation of their private corporation being the country or the nation, when in fact it is not the nation, never was, etc., and is not and has no authority to exercise any judicial authorities, any legislative authorities, and has no authority to exercise any executive operations on the land, air, or waters of America, etc. And so this is where our political and social economic paradigm is today in the affairs of man. And this is the area that must be cleared up with many of our people who really don't know their history, their rightful inheritance, civics and law, etc. And this is what basically we've been talking about over the years. So keep in mind, those of you who are listening now, write down Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution for the United States, and that will give you a reference. Also, look up Ordinance of 1787, and that's before the adoption of the Constitution for the United States, 1788. And then you'll recognize 1789, which was the only constitutional convention dealing with any modification whatsoever. And this is where George Washington, the military general, was assigned as the praetor for the United States, the Republic, etc. And you will see those areas of the transferring of the estates and the Bonnevilles of the Aboriginal people territorially converted into the corporate states operations during that administration. And this is again why it is not taught to the people. 1789, with the assignment of George Washington to the presidential office, that they ignore telling the people that the seat of the president for the republic was actually instituted 1781 with John Hanson, Phoenician, i.e., more of the land, etc., and on up onto Boudinot, etc., before George was adopted. This is why they don't teach the people that George was the ninth president, because it would mess up the false paradigm or the false education that has been promoted under the animal husbandry since 1902 in particular, that has contaminated the people to such a degree that many people, when you even get into the subject matter, they get both cross-eyed and they get all muddied in the brain, and many of them, out of not knowing what's really up, will actually attack the truth and the fact, thinking it's against them. And of course, collectively, we've been suffering from that paradigm. So the republic is the proper order of government which secures both the rights of the people and of property. And of course, with the Article 3, Section 1 and Section 2, you will see the judicial venues that have been set forth for securing the rights of people, and in the political forums of anyone holding seats of government. Therefore, your judicial, authoritative, properly authoritative courts would be that for, the diplomats and ambassadors, due to the fact that the United States is a trading company doing business at North America, and in relationship to the indigenous people and the treaty enforcement law that supersede the adoption of the Constitution would be your consular venue. And this is why you see Article 3, Section 2, dealing with the controversies between people of different states, people of the same states, and of foreign states, is described via the supreme law of the land, etc. And this is why people, many who have been compromised or who have been actually operating against the Aboriginal people of the land, have always promoted under false pretexts whenever there was a controversy, i.e., the fakery of the 14th Amendment operations of 1868, which has no standing at law and is also referred to as a nullity, or what you call negative law, to promote any controversy relative to land and rights and heirship of the people under the fakery of civil rights of 1868, distinguished from and in opposition to the established law of the land of the consular venue via the Constitution for the United States, enforcing all treaties of the United States as demonstrated in Article 3 and Article 6 of the Constitution for the United States. This is again why people who have been compromised will not emphasize Article 3, Section 1, Section 2, Article 4, Section 4, and Article 6, which is what ties the people who are doing business here to their obligation to secure the rights of Aboriginal people or the people of the land via all treaties, etc. And this is why many of them, again, as we say, get upset as soon as you go there, because it not only exposes the fraud of colonial operations, it also exposes those among the Aboriginal people who have sold out and who have been actually helping the hybrid Europeans to maintain colonial operations, or what is known as the hybrid European hegemony systems on the land, in violation of treaty and constitution, which is what we're suffering from today. So now, the other thing that I was want bring it to your attention, for those of you, and write this down, research War Manual for the United States, 1928, and even up to that time, it is well known fact that the democracy platform that has been falsely promoted by scholars and by politicians is actually in violation to all of their oaths and in violation to the Constitution for the United States at America, operating at America, violation of the treaties, etc., and was put in place to neutralize their obligation as trustees and in any seat of government to secure the rights of the people.
Looks like it was 1929.
28 and 29, yes. Yes. And you'll see that, go ahead.
Several have asked how you spell, I think you said the Odyssey. I don't know how you
On Honesty Confederation relative to the adoption of the treaty.
Know how to spell it.
That's with the H.
I still don't know how to spell it. H what?
Oh, HON.
Okay.
E, yeah.
HON what?
Honesty. It would sound like Hana Honesty, or you can even because they corrupted many of the tribal names. You can put Iroquois Confederation and the adoption of the Constitution for the United States, and you'll see it is well known among the scholars that those principles of governmental structure didn't.
Here we go.
Yes.
HAUDE. Okay, I'll spell it for
yes.
you. Okay, y'all, I'm gonna give y'all the spelling. I found it. He's giving me something. Okay. I didn't mean to interrupt, but it was in here several times.
I couldn't understand what you're saying.
I said I didn't mean to interrupt, but the question was here like.
Oh, well, share that with them.
10 times. Okay, so it's called. You go ahead and talk. I'll type it in. You can continue. I'll just type it in.
All right. And so this is very important, and we're sharing this with the people so that you can, because remember this. One of the things that we always promote is not to accept what we're saying. We try to give the people or share with the people reference points so the knowledge can become your own. Because the exercise of competence in heirship and in government is based on the knowledge of the nationals of the land enforcing the treaties. And relative to foreign governmental relations in treaty with other nationals, then you would be dealing with people under citizenship category. And so keep in mind the obligations in law is for the nationals and the citizens to enforce the treaties and the Constitution. This is why corrupt politicians don't teach civics, because they have promoted the fiction that politicians give people rights when in fact they do not and are unable, both lawfully and realistically, because it doesn't rest with them. It already rests with the people. And this is why you will see a lot of people, when you begin to start telling the people the truth, you'll see some people that you expect to be helping the people will immediately start attacking sovereignty or anything that even sounds like it, because the information will expose them as traitors. And this is aside from the hybrid Europeans who are colonists who have a motive because they're colonists. So a colonist is an exploiter, is a vampire in the nature of both economic, social, political activities. Even though that's falsely hidden under the guise of racism, their motive is valid, not morally or ethically, but valid according to the political act of someone who is committing war, etc. However, for the people who are part of the Aboriginal people by blood or by birthright, etc., who betray the people, definitely don't want the people to even talk in the area of anything sovereign, because it would reveal them as actually sellouts and actually traitors. And so this is why you see a lot of controversy around the Moorish divine and national movement of the world, and particularly at North America, because the heartland of the operations of the Illuminati and popes of Rome for world conquest under the hybrid European hegemony systems, etc., under Unum Sanctum, Doctrine of Discovery, etc., Dum Diversas, Romanus Pontifex, Sister QV Act, etc. Logically, they don't want the people to start looking or researching these things, because the people would have more competent and intelligent responses to occupation and would not be wasting their time marching around on their own land or arguing fictional race arguments. They would be arguing or presenting legitimate arguments of reversion of a state. And this is, again, why we often would refer to the people the general statement or the concept of reversion of a state. And for those, many of you who have studied already know, but this would be for many of you who don't know, because remember, this conversation tonight is mainly for a lot of people who are becoming conscious but are still caught in that gray area, so that you can have a clearer comprehension of the political operations taking place at North America that has been affecting everyone, and also have a cognate idea of why the controversy exists, and also why many people who you wouldn't otherwise hear from or hear of all of a sudden have something to say. Particularly with a lot of trolls, you'll see a lot of people who have been trolling this information, etc. You'll notice that a lot of these people you never even heard of. And as the people evolved and became more and more conscious of what's really going on in the political realm, and you start seeing the nations of the earth stop trading with the United States Corporation and Company, as we've been telling you for years that they would start doing, and that you would start having a feedback loop. And now that people are seeing the malls close all around the land, and they start seeing the heads of different corporations stepping down, and you start seeing them doing all this censoring of information, etc. And then all of a sudden you find a lot of so-called people who claim to be conscious all of a sudden attacking anything referencing constitution or treaty, attacking anyone that talks about anything relative to divine right of sovereignty, etc. All of a sudden you find these people popping up out of nowhere, making videos and counter arguments, etc. However, the deal of it is once you know the reality of the Organic Act of Congress 1871 and the Act of Great Britain 1871, you'll begin to recognize that this fraud has been perpetrated on the people, and you will be able to easily vet anyone that has anything to say about organized government operating on the land with any judicial authority whatsoever at North America. And then you would be better competent and able to, by your own competent mind, claim your right of a state via what is known internationally in the rule of inheritance or heritability, a reversion of a state. And this is, again, why years ago we made a general statement and we published it to give people a frame of reference of thought relative to someone who has right of heirship, but who had been previously denied their right of heirship, and by them not knowing the real politics or the real history or basic civics, were incompetent in relationship to their capacity to speak up in relationship to their estate or birthright inheritance. And so we wrote a general statement of reversion and reversioner, and this would be in lesson book 14 and 14A. And for those of you who have been studying with us for years are familiar with those, but those who have not been studying, this is from one of my lessons in the late 80s and published in 93 area to 96 area through the lesson books. And this is called a reversioner. So keep this in mind. Reversion of a state is basically any one that is known in law as descendable who's making a counter argument to an occupational operations of what is known as wardship tenures, who is claiming right of their estate by virtue of them being competent to make that argument. i.e., they're firing the FOFR or corrupt trustee. This is what it is. Now, and then logically, as you all know, being in one's own proper person and not with one of the members of the British accredited registry to represent you, because at that time you lose your estate again. This is why you must be competent. You would be making statements in line with this concept of thought, knowing the distinction between the organic land, the organic constitution for the republic in relationship to treaty enforcement, etc., i.e., true organic land jurisdiction, distinguished from the corporate operations of a United States corporation company registered in Austria, run from Davos, Switzerland, which has been presented falsely for these last 100 years or more as the nation which it was not and is not. Those persons operating that corporation have been operating as FOFers or trustees over the occupied land, America. Keep that in mind. And then you present your argument of your appellation. Some people say name, but keep in mind the name would deal with both the organic being in one instance, but also a corporate. This is why we say appellation. So keep that in mind. So often when you see people or hear people make the statement appellation, they're talking about your natural and divine natal attribute given to you by your mothers and your fathers by natural birth, not by admiralty birth of shipping. Make those distinctions. And then you declare your free national name. That's what that means. Your free national name. That's what that means. That means your organic, divine attribute. The living, sentient man and rightful heir am not lost at sea, and I affirm and declare my right of reversion of estate, quote unquote, reversion of estate. And therefore, I make no claim with respect to the title and misrepresented name / man of straw and nom de guerre being a title and the spurious creations of the foreign de facto United States corporate operators, actors, and owners. And I surrender and assign any and all reversionary interest, quote unquote, to the foreign United States and its subsidiaries for full, quote unquote, acquittance, discharge, settlement, quote unquote, acquittance, discharge, settlement, and quote unquote, closure of my reliance, Title 12, United States Code 95, subsection A, Part 2. And I assume no liabilities or debts, however contrived, among its associates. And I do not consent to stand as, quote unquote, surety for the foreign, private, and for profit United States Incorporated U.S. corporation company entity owners, directors, or their administrators. Nor do I stand as, quote unquote, surety for its subsidiaries or its associates at any point or moment in time. Study that general statement, break it down, and comprehend that that is, in its nature, a reversion of a state. And in that nature of statement, doesn't have to be the same words, but in the same nature, would be the declaratory statement presented to a belligerent FOFR or trustee, particularly those who have been in breach, etc., in relationship to them ceasing and desisting using the straw Sister QV trust operative bond instruments, which they have been selling around the world via the stock market, the US stock market, etc., and tying it falsely through the 14th Amendment or the straw man nom de guerre to the organic men and women of the land, and thus via that platform creating fungible instruments that essentially comprises the basis of the stock known as the US Treasury bonds, by which they have actually been doing via their bond system human trafficking veiled under the guise of movement of the stock market, assuming and knowing that most people didn't know that is generally the process of their economic operations. And logically, as the people have become over the last century more and more cognate of the issue of nationality and birthright, which deals with heritability, etc., why many people have been upset with Prophet Noble Drew Ali for exposing that information that caused this revolution both here at North America and around the world, i.e., thus the association with and the tie to the Moorish divine and national movement of the world for restoring the lost estate of the Moors, i.e., indigenous tribes of North America and around the world. And now those principles have grown around the planet, and thus you have nations of the earth have taken the principles of restoration or reversion of a state that Noble Drew Ali argued over 120 years ago and presented to the Moors of North America, i.e., the so-called Indian tribes, to restore their right of estate. And those principles have now been adopted around the planet. And this is what you're experiencing now. The distinction between the operative republic, distinguished from the de facto and spurious, i.e., democracy platform set forth via the Act of Great Britain 1871, also known as the Organic Act of Congress 1871, which was set forth to set up their platform of colonial operations of hybrid European hegemony, falsely referred to and commonly referred to as white supremacy operations, which is the real motive as to why they bombed Tulsa, Oklahoma, why they burned cities around Greenfield, North Carolina, why they built many dams around the land and drowned, or what you call put underwater, many of the Aboriginal peoples, ancient cities, etc., here at North America, why they tore down many of the pyramids all over America and literally built cities with them in order to alter the history, and also why they created all the paradigms of dividing the ancient Moorish tribes against each other under the Bureau of Indian Affairs in order to still claim to claim jurisdiction or inheritance jurisdiction and wardship tenures over the lands of the indigenous people, and tricking them into consent by agreeing to be many of these tags and nom de guerre that they were creating under the guise of restoring sovereignty to the people of the land. This is why you will see many people who have studied the corruption and the misprission operations. You'll see them arguing what is known commonly as the $5 Indian problem that we're suffering from, and things like that. All of that deals with them creating these false paradigms of fictional sovereign right of estate restoration. This is, again, why Noble Drawley reestablished the right of heirship argument to the true heirs of the land, etc. And the reversioner, that statement is in the nature of a statement made by what you would refer to as any qualified and competent descendable heir of any estate. And knowing that all seats in government are seats of trust, you must know that the people must be made aware civically of what trust is, and thus have a general knowledge of trust law, and know that government and government seats are offices of trust. This is again why they don't teach civics, because once you know that these are offices of trust, you know that they don't give you rights. The rights already exist with you. And this is why they have turned this thing totally around and have people think that they can legislate rights and then conditionally give them to the people, which of course is what they have done under the fraud, particularly of the 14th Amendment. And this is why when you see the history here of them genociding the Aboriginal people off the land in order to steal their estates, etc., and bombing the most wealthy bank operating on the land in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and to tell you that part, and stealing the gold and the land, etc., and then reconstructing the history so that even the heirs of the people forget the fact that they were heirs to a lot of wealth, and they have the people begging for rights and begging the hybrid European directors of the United States corporation to secure rights when actually they were the ones that was stealing their rights. So know the distinction between the republic and the democracy.
I've highlighted a few questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Here's the first question for Taj. What are your thoughts on the World Economic Forum's Great Reset?
Well, you know the Great Reset has to do with the hegemony operators known as the United States Corporation Company, which you already know recently, for those, and you can do a little bit of research, here at the House of Reawakening Minds around 2013, we shared with the people the motu proprio issued by the Pope of Rome in relationship to the obligations of these board of trustees, which you know as the Congress and the senators, who are actually board of trustees for the occupations of North America. People who thought they were actually legitimate holders of office or have been confused about their operations. But those who know better. And now that the nations of the world have been negatively affected by their hegemony operations, not that they didn't know about it, in order to save themselves, they have gotten together and started trading among each other according to constitutional principles, i.e., gold and silver trade, and stopped using the Jesuit order's Federal Reserve operations controlled from Fleet Street, England, etc., belonging to the Pope of Rome. And thus you have your trade wars that are going on now, or what you call the stagnation of world trade. And so the reset that they've been talking about has been actually the board of directors for the United States Corporation Company, which went bankrupt again in 2013, and then absolutely 2018, and then settled on 2019. And we don't have to talk about the biological activity that has taken place here at North America, particularly since 2019, with those who have been creating this corruption under the democracy platform. They have planned to put these people into a digital format, which they've been using actually for over 50 years. The public think that digital quote unquote currency, which is not money, thought it was money. It was actually so they could steal the rest from the people and put them into abject servitude so that they could not counter. That's their reset. The other reset is the rest of the world coming together, stop trading with them with the intent of overthrowing the democracy platform, which was set up in what is known as the Organic Act of Congress 1871, or same name, same platform, Act of Great Britain, 1871, etc. So you have those two forces that are still fighting or battling over our estate, and is centered at North America and projected around the world. And that is called the Great Reset. But it has 2 points to it. One, for the restoration of the estate of the Aboriginal people, which is why you hear them talking about so-called Aboriginal people's rights all of a sudden, and the rights of indigenous people all of a sudden, when they never intended to exercise that. And then you see the other that intends to put the people into abject poverty to reduce the population so that people can't fight back. And that collectively is known as the Great Reset.
What are your thoughts? This wasn't there, but what are your thoughts on the fact that the IRS has put all this finance into getting these new agents, but that they want to require these agents to be able to be willing to bear arms and be willing to shoot.
Not be willing to
shoot. They want them to be able to do financial plus enforcement carrying weapons.
All right, which we already knew. The IRS is really the Inquisition Revenue Services, which we've been telling you all for 40 years. And it's becoming apparent to everyone now. Before, many people who should have been telling you this were actually attacking us for sharing this information with you, and calling Taji guy a rebel, and lying and saying that I was against the temple when actually I was defending the principles that Drew Ali set up via the temples, which had been infiltrated, which is also why they won't show you the FBI papers, which proves that the temples have been infiltrated, etc. But the real deal of it is, what you must know is that the United States Corporation went bankrupt again 2018. They settled in 2019, and they've been since that attacking the people with bio situations to kill the people off. And again, we've been telling the people, once you begin any processes, and this is again why we always told people some of the things that we were doing before we'll not be doing later, because we knew that it was necessary for people to demonstrate some kind of level of competence in the nature of heirship, which they were never doing. They were always arguing racism, prejudice, funding organizations that were promoting that false paradigm, which was actually promoting an acceptance of the 14th Amendment, which was constructed under the Sister Q V Act of 1666, which gave the hybrid occupational Europeans consent of heirship abandonment, and thus a continuation of the wardship tenure which they were operating under, which is what we're dealing with right now. But again, to reiterate what I've been saying before, since the people have been doing things that have been countering the straw operations, unbeknownst to them that didn't know it, they were actually killing the bond system. This has much to do with the stock market crashing, which is what it's actually doing as we speak. And you have what is known as the apex of competence among what you would call breached heirs. So enough of the heirs are cognate enough to begin to speak up and to project within the public discourse their right of claim of estate, and moving away from the organizational paradigms and agencies that were set forth deceptively, such as Bureau of Indian Affairs and platforms created by the hybrid Europeans, and the Civil Rights Marchers and the Civil Rights Act that was created by the hybrid Europeans in order to create both divisions amongst the Aboriginal people of the land and promote incompetence among the Aboriginal people of the land, and to promote deceptive consent of the existence of these agencies by the Aboriginal people of the land, which would constitute abandonment of estate. There's enough people that are cognizant enough to know the trickery, and this is where the controversy of declaring nationality has messed up the whole system, which was the purpose, and has actually killed the bonds. And so the bankruptcy is in place. The concepts of, you see, the international trade, all your malls closing, the 401ks becoming 409ks, which we told you would happen, which is taking place right now. The fractionalization that they practice with the private commercial paper of the United States Corporation Company have been converted to the fractionalization of the marriage certificates, the car registries, i.e. in the birth certificates, and also the fractionalization of even any bank accounts that the people had trusted the bankers with also have been fractionalized. So all of you who have bank accounts, which we've been telling you for years, they have created what you call bot bank accounts in the name or in the attributes of the people and have been stealing and trading that. All of that stuff is dying. So that's what's actually going on now. And it's accelerating. So again, we've always been encouraging you to learn to love instead of hate, to help each other, to not get caught up in the schism operations, and to recognize that you're going to need each other seriously, because they're also going to start starving you out, which is what they're doing now. Keep that in mind.
Here's another question. He's asked Taj about the Vatican bank restrict.
All right. Now, this is what's happening right now as we speak. All of the different corporate entities that have been party secretly to the United States Corporation Company have been directed from the Vatican to send or to remove all of their hard monetary assets from the banks and to send all of them to the Vatican Bank under the Pope, etc. And that's going on as we speak. And their cutoff date has, as instructed by Illuminati and by the Pope, has been September the 30th, has been the cutoff date. That means they are, as we're speaking, taking all of their hard asset finance from all of the banks as we speak, with September the 30th being the cutoff date.
So what does
and they're doing it now.
So that means they're taking out.
That means they're ahead of the curve, and we've been telling the people to do it for a long time. But like I said to you before, Doc, you can't keep on arguing with these people. Drawley done told them this stuff for 120 years. Those who listened have been acting. Those who don't, stop trying to convince them, because it's already on. The storm is not coming. The storm is already here. And this conversation is really for stragglers and people that are just late waking up to what's up, so that they can use their intelligence, their divine intelligence, to start making moves to protect themselves and their families. And we're not telling them to financially do this or financially do that, because there is none of the institutions that are valid, and they are collapsing. So there's, to say to invest in this or invest in that would be not fair and not competent, because they're all collapsing, which we told you they would do. Now you're going to have to depend on your divine mind and your godship that y'all been claiming all these decades, all these centuries, your connection to your divine. You're now charged to do it, not by me, but by Mother Nature. And she ain't playing, because she's doing cleanup too. Because that's what's up. That's what's happening right now as we speak. So again, while we're having this conversation, and this is for people to know that the democracy platform is the platform of misprission for enforcing the U.S. And the U.S. is unum sanctum, and not a country, and not a nation state. And if you don't know that by now, there's no argument to be made. We're only arguing for those who have been listening and were willing to act, because guess what? They are on a tear to cause the greatest injury to humanity that they can, as fast as they can and as hard as they can, before they get totally removed.
Here's another
And your savior is within. Just put that way. So stop looking for sacrificial lamb saviors too, because that's not going to happen either.
I so remember, I don't know if I said it to you or not. I said save yourself.
That's what it is.
It's yourself. You're gonna have to save
you know, because the tools that they have used, you know, this whole psychology with dogma, with these outside gods that has taken root on humanity, has clearly damaged humanity. You know, and if they're not willing to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, no need to keep arguing with them, because the storm is here. You know, it's sort of like when they talk about Zikrab, Zoroaster, Yeshua, Muhammad, Musa, when they talk about the different prophets, etc., Dwali, any of the prophets that they refer, any of the Buddhists, Confucius, any of the prophets or the philosophers that have come to aid humanity, when they talk about them and things that they have said or presented to humanity, it was done as a precursor so that the people could take responsibility of heirship and start adjusting their lives accordingly. It must be comprehended that what they warned you of is here now. And if you haven't applied it or began to apply it in your lives, it's sort of like this. We're at a stage of harvest. And that's the reality. And knowing that this was coming, this is why we always warn people, so that people would not get stagnated. Because in different processes or different things that we've done over the years, writs and other things, were actually to tack to straw. But people who don't recognize when the straw has been choked are still arguing dead arguments when that is done. You got to move on. You have to ascend. In other words, the deal is you're given prophecy so that you don't burn energy in the time of the open warfare. Before, the warfare was covert for the most part. And every once in a while, they would do an overt act like bombing move in Philadelphia, as an example, because those Asiatics would not send their children to the John D. Rockefeller Institution for Mind Control.
So, what they just did with the Uhuru.
Same thing. Same thing. It is no different. It is no, and it's sort of like, what do the hybrid Europeans have to do to prove to these people that they're not part of their corporation? How many generations do they have to sacrifice to wake these people up? The deal of it is, you know, try to save the children that's left, some that are less contaminated, and we're going to have to build from there after they genocide more of the people out, which they're already in the process of doing. And they're already in the process of planning to starve you out. You already know it's coming. Those who have a sense already see it on the horizon. Don't think that this inflation is a circumstance. It's not. It's part of the war activity. The people just won't accept that the people they've called government is waging war on them. And the deal of it is, we're not going to keep arguing with you.
Another question?
Ready
for another question?
Yes.
Okay, please ask Taj what he thinks of the Alex Jones War Room and other hybrid Albion's attempts to integrate republic/democracy into their platforms of what government should be.
This is two things that are happening. They're telling you or implying certain truths to save their own so-called middle class, and at the same time, they're also trying to sustain what you call an heirship status to an estate that don't belong to them. All in the same argument. Soon as they say democracy, that's the key to the fraud. Now, and for the being divine being to ask that question, immediately go to your law dictionary or any history book or any civic book and read Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, and then share with us what part says democracy. Because it doesn't. And so whenever you see the hybrid even say that word, that's the password used among them to indicate that, like, say, for instance, they might say something that sounds like it's supporting the restoration of the republic, and then they interject the democracy, our democracy. That's a code word that means in their statement to the public, they're continuing to deceive their true heirs. Because the operation of government is a constitutional republic, not a democracy. The democracy is the de facto operations of misprission of 1871, dealing with the overthrow of the republic so that they would not have to honor their obligation to the superseding treaties that supersede the Constitution. This is why they won't tell people Article 3, Section 1 and 2 tells you bluntly that the treaties and the Constitution comprises the supreme law. This is also why you see a lot of people claim to be conscious. As soon as it started catching on around the world, it's not only just here at North America, around the world, that many people started exercising or activating the pre-existing lawful judicial platform of Article 3, Section 2, Consular Court. Why you've seen so many people get upset and angry and start actually attacking, because they know that's the only lawful venue via Aboriginal and indigenous people are to make their arguments in relationship to their estate, to the occupying governmental platforms. This is why you don't see them saying republic. You hear them keep on saying our democracy. That's the fraud. That's the hegemony operations. But they always will give the argument like they're concerned with the people's right. That's the come on. And then they'll slip in democracy. That's the code word to the other operatives that they're intending to undermine the appearance of the restoration of the republic. That's why when you see anybody making reference to Nasara and Gesara as presented by Pope Francis, etc., to Barack H. Obama in 2014, you don't see any of these so-called leaders or politicians reading that document to the public. And you don't see any of the so-called civic leaders in the so-called colored and black and Indian communities reading that to their people of the land. They don't want you to go there, because as soon as you do, you're going to see that this whole thing has been a fraud. And by their own words, a fraud. Let me share you a little bit of the letter. And again, like I said, this is redundant, but this is for newcomers or people that are just becoming conscious and are working their way through the gray area and being subject to a lot of so-called conscious Moors who have been traitors, distinguished from some conscious Moors who have actually been trying to liberate the people and to restore the estate, etc. And then other hybrid Europeans who have been parties to the so-called middle class that has been dissolved. All of a sudden, they want to give you some history about what's really going on. That's because the middle class has been dissolved. But before, they weren't saying anything. All of a sudden, they got something to say. I'm not knocking it, but recognize that they're not the heirs. So let's go to the Pope's letter to Obama. And keeping, and I'm going to read this. It's only one page, but keep in mind, for those of you who are sharing here with the House of Reawakening Minds, and many of you who come on the official hours with Dr. G, office hours with Dr. G, who over the past years have listened to some or take notes on some of the statements or things that she has shared ad hoc, just honest, open conversation with you while she was traveling. You know, when it came on her to talk, she would just share. And a lot of times, a lot of these, what you call just ad hoc conversations and ad hoc notations are some of your most powerful. A lot of these things have been dropped on you over the years. Put them together and start recognizing the puzzle. I'm going to share with you direct, documented information from the popes of Rome to Barack H. Obama, etc. Take notes, do research. Now, this is civil orders by Pope Francis. Keep in mind who owns the United States Corporation Company that's run from Davos, Switzerland. Keep that in mind. Commentary on the letter issued by Pope Francis, known as Civil Orders. Now, the Civil Orders letter, in its condensed concept, is presented publicly and has been available to the public. Anyone can pull up on their phone, computer, anything. However, you don't see the politicians and you don't see the so-called civic leaders going into this because it would show traitors on both sides. Keep that in mind. Commentary on the letter issued by Pope Francis. The original, organic, and de jure constitutional United States Republic Act North America and its Republican form of government set forth and established at Article 4, Section 4 of that Constitution was secretly overthrown and converted into a foreign, privately owned, and for-profit corporation in the year 1871. See the Act of Congress, 1871. That misprision derived and foreign feudal law entity was styled as the United States Corporation Company, quote unquote, which is commonly referred to as the U.S. democracy, quote unquote. That privately owned entity created by acts of misprision and its corporate franchisees were and are ultimately and factually owned by the Vatican, being members of the Roman Curia. This politically and socially subdued truth is actually the source of the functioning jurisdictional powers that gives the Pope of Rome or the Vatican bishopric the valid and affirmable, quote unquote, authority, capitalized, expressed and executed via this impacting letter. This letter, titled Civil Orders, was posted on August the 15th of 2015, but if this said posting is correct, the measured time reports that it was apparently sent to President Barack H. Obama over a year ago, being July the 4th of 2014. And the Post letter not only confirms that the United States, U.S., is operating under a corporation, but the Post letter also confirms the quote unquote General Carter Ham will be heading the new republic when it is announced. The announcement will be part of the Nasara announcements. And this current pope is working for the light. Anyway, don't waste your time on the politicals or circus concerning the U.S. election. And I don't expect to see one. When Nasara is announced, the new interim president becomes the president of the quote unquote new republic for 6 months, after which free elections are held. And we can then elect the interim president for another 4 years or elect someone else. And the content of the letter below is pretty self-evident and explanatory. And you may want to check out the attachment, Mr. T. We're going to go into the direct letter, and here's a picture of Barack H. Obama with Pope Francis. And this is the letter issued to Barack H. Obama, July the 4th of 2014. Pope Francis sent Obama a powerful letter via attorney on July the 4th, 2014, known as Civil Orders, July the 4th, 2014. Issued to all members of the domestic police forces, U.S. Marshal Services, the Provost Marshal, members of the American Bar Association, and the American Armed Forces. These organic American states of the Union, known as the United States of America, quote unquote, major, exercising plenary civil power upon the land, hereby appoint General Carter F. Ham to lead and command the Grand Army of the Republic, known as GARR, and its successors under the guidance of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and with their full support. Should it become necessary to suppress commercial mercenary forces operating under the guise of being federal government agencies, including but not limited to the Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, the Internal Revenue Service, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, etc., General Ham shall assume immediate command and control of all armed forces and services owed to the United States of America, major, stationed in North America, and shall join them under his command as the Grand Army of the Republic. All forces of air, land, and sea are to be employed. Any cost or loss suffered as a result of deployment of the Grand Army of the Republic shall be charged as stipulated prior. All efforts shall be made by the Grand Army of the Republic to spare life and property while undertaking any action whatsoever within the states of the Union without exception. The Grand Army of the Republic is uniquely enabled by these quote unquote orders to operate on the land of the 50 organic states for the purposes of securing the lives and property of the American states and American state citizens. The Grand Army of the Republic is not a foreign army and is composed primarily of American state citizens. If required to take field position, the local commanders shall make every effort to communicate the basis of their authority and the reasons for their presence on American state soil to ensure a prompt cessation of hostilities and a widespread understanding of the usurpations and acts of fraud which have led to any conflict. All parties must be brought to understand the nature of the federal government, the limitations of its authority, and their own obligation to act in favor of the organic states of the Union. The Grand Army of the Republic shall continue to operate under General Order 100, known as the quote-unquote Lieber Code, extant from the pen of the last Republic President Abraham Lincoln. No orders, executive or otherwise, issued to Barack H. Obama pretending authority on the land of the American states while operating as quote unquote President of the United States Corporation, all capital letters, nor as the quote unquote President of the United States of America, minor, are owed any performance by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Ham, or any ordinary, and all plainly stated grants of contractual authority evident in the Constitution for the United States, small u, of America remain in place, subject to good faith performance of the accompanying obligations and treaties. Mr. Obama is the quote-unquote president of a governmental services corporation under contract to provide stipulated services to the organic states and is on their payroll. He otherwise acts as a foreign dignitary representing the United States of America minor, and in neither one of these capacities is he allowed any granted authority to impose upon American state citizens, endanger American state property, or command mercenary forces on American state soil, however veiled as federal civilian service agencies. We require the Joint Chiefs of Staff and General Ham to commence measures to disarm civilian agency personnel and to seize control of the vast stockpiles of arms which have been improperly amassed by the Department of Homeland Security, FEMA, or other agencies employed by the United States, all capital letters. The only federal agency allowed free egress on the land of the American states is the U.S. Marshal Services, and then only when their personnel are engaged in their duties to protect the U.S. mail and sworn to act as constitutional officers. All other federal agency personnel are limited to unarmed service until further notice. We direct the Joint Chiefs of Staff to communicate these first two general civil orders directly to Mr. Obama, the members of the U.S. Congress, the administrators of all quote-unquote federal agencies, the members of the quote-unquote Supreme Court, and those acting as quote-unquote governors to compel their rapid understanding and cooperation. Any expense or damages incurred by these organic states or any American state citizen as a result of actions undertaken by any federal agency personnel acting as armed mercenaries on American state soil will be understood as a result of violent crimes committed against the peaceful inhabitants of the land and will incur immediate judgment liquidating the assets of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the Federal Reserve, small case and uppercase, in payment of the stipulated reparations, and such crimes shall be considered contract default, increasing the public debt subject to bounty. And all corporate officers of the United States, all capital letters, or any successor organizations inheriting quote-unquote federal service contracts who support, condone, or promote such crimes against the American states or against American state citizens shall be subject to arrest and prosecution for commercial and violent crimes. All foreign officials operating as elected or appointed officials of the United States of America, minor, who support, condone, or promote such crimes against the American states or American state citizens shall be subject to arrest, confiscation of their assets, and deportation to Puerto Rico, Guam, or such other quote-unquote states as may be willing to receive them. Such foreign officials include members of the American and British bar associations who were licensed to act as privateers against the interests of American states and the American state citizens from 1845 to 2013 in flagrant breach of trust. And all such licenses are now extinguished. Repeat, all such licenses are now extinguished. Members of the bar associations are required to cease and desist assaults against the American states and American state citizens and shall be subject to arrest, confiscation, and deportation otherwise. Insomuch as corporate officers operating the United States of America Incorporated and the United States, all capital letters, have contrived under conditions of fraud and semantic deceit to revenue the estates of the American states and living American state citizens to the foreign jurisdiction of the United States of America minor, they are found guilty of capital crimes, including acts of fraud and treason committed between 1933 and 1945, and are condemned posthumously. And insomuch as elected officials operating the United States of America minor have summarily or similarly committed war crimes against the American states and their peaceful inhabitants during the same time period, they stand condemned posthumously. No enforcement upon any American state or American state citizen is owed as a result of any quote unquote act of any quote unquote Congress operating as the sovereign government of the United States of America minor, nor as the board of directors or board of trustees of any incorporated entity whatsoever. And all these estates, small case, and all these estates, uppercase, erroneously believed to represent the American states and American state citizens, and which were conveyed by fraud and legal deceit to the United States of America minor, and more recently to the city-state of the United Nations, are revenued without exception to the geographically defined American states and the American state citizens, where they shall remain in perpetuity as assets belonging to the rightful and lawful beneficiaries. All legal fiction entities, however structured and named after the American states and the American state citizens, are returned to them and their control, free and clear of any debt, promise, encumbrance, or obligation alleged against them as a result of false claims made in their behalf, quote unquote, by officers of the United States of America Incorporated and the United States Incorporated, all capital letters, or by any foreign officials operating the United States of America minor or the United Nations city-state, falsely claiming to, quote unquote, represent them or to have jurisdiction over them. We note that the current circumstance is in part of the result of criminal acts engaged in 150 years ago, which resulted in the commercial enslavement of African Americans who were summarily claimed as chattels back in United States government debt in wake of the Civil War. Despite every act of abolition and declaration of prohibition against both peonage and slavery, it has been the policy of the quote unquote U.S. government to enslave its citizens and to operate as a rogue state among the nations of the world. Instead of freeing African Americans, the sum total result of the Civil War was to vastly expand public sector ownership of slaves, giving rise to the outrageous and improper claims that have been made against the American states and American state citizens.
I know that's we've been over that. I have a question though. I have a
Well,
comment.
I only got 2 more paragraphs. Let me finish.
Okay.
Against American state citizens, etc. That we are dealing with today, it is uniquely fitting that the Grand Army of the Republic is called to settle this circumstance in favor of the people. Attachments, civil orders. Anna Maria Wilhelmina Hanna Sophia Ritzinger von Ritzenstein von Letlow Verbeck, private attorney in service to His Holiness Pope Francis, documents related. The United States isn't a country, it's a corporation, the hidden Vatican Crown Empire. End of civil orders.
Okay, I'm just going to say this, and I don't know if anybody else feels like this, but I certainly feel like this. I remember when that allegedly, I'm going to call it allegedly, came out in 2013 or so, when you shared. Whatever that says, none of that has been recognized or adhered to. So it seems as if it was a bunch
breach.
Either breach,
all was breach,
ignored, or it was actually BS.
Right.
And I'm just saying that.
Yes, you're absolutely
none
correct.
Of that ish has happened. So for me and probably other folks that are listening, like, yeah, all well, but nothing has happened to change this matter. As a matter of fact, particularly when you spoke about the nobody should have arms, and so that they are amping up their arms. They're doing everything that thing says.
So what is it proving? What is it proving? That they're in breach?
I don't know, but
no, this is what it proves. Look, they're in breach, right? Now, and remember, this was written by Pope Francis after the motu proprio, which they also breached.
But here's the other thing before you go there. He is a part of the criminal element.
Of course.
So how is somebody who is a part of in the thick of what's been going on, going to write something and going to condemn the very actions that they have promoted for 1,000+ years?
All right, now, for those of you who remember what took place with the motu proprio 2013, they called religious leaders from around the world and civic leaders from around the world so-called Muslim Christians and Jews, and they were kissing the ring of the Pope, and they promised, and it's documented, do the research, that they were ending the doctrine of discovery. Of course, they breached that. This was a follow-up. And of course, they breached that. Now you understand why Russia, China, India, and the different nations of Africa have come together and constructed what you know as the BRICS operations and have stop trading with them. And this is what you're experiencing right now. And particularly, and keep in mind, those of you who are familiar with the works of Noble Drew Ali, keep in mind Act 1 in the Moorish Temple of Science and the Moorish Science Temple of America. These people who are moderators and chairmen and sheiks and grand sheiks and sheikesses of the Moorish Science Temple of America, they were put in power to make law and to enforce law, if they live according to love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice, and it is known by the members of the Moorish Holy Temple of Science. That means all the members were supposed to know civics, etc., and the enforcement of the Constitution. We don't have to talk about whether or not they breached. The history tells you everything. And therefore, the nations of the earth recognize that these people, no matter what was done, what was said, whatever they promised, they breached, and they breached, which is important why you can understand and know the operations and the reason why they breached, because they are compromised owners of the United States Corporation Company, i.e., the democracy platform, the democracy, U.S. democracy operations, etc., and that the Inquisition operations never ended. Therefore, the nations of the earth stopped trading with them. That's what you're experiencing right now. You need to know the politics in order to know what's going on. And thus, again, as we said before, the opportunity for them to come in honor was given over 200 years. And at the end, even when the Grand Army of the Republic, as you all know, those who do research, even approached the different nation states, i.e. in political jurisdictions of the United States Corporation and the Vatican, etc., to enforce these issues that they were actually forced to arrest many, which they won't tell you about. And this is why a lot of that information is being censored on your in your social media. And this is why those executive orders were issued by Donald J. Trump in 2017, 18, etc., which are being enforced today. And this is why the general masses have not been made familiar with Nasara and Gesara, and knowing what the background is, and also knowing that all persons from the police departments on up to all of the other franchisees of the United States Corporation Company had been put on notice. So anyone who claims that these people, any one of them, were not made aware of the true political platform, etc. So the issue and a document was issued directly to Barack H. Obama. And this is why for any of you who are listening or sharing with us now, you can go on your phone and pull up Barack H. Obama and the Moorish flag. You can pull up civil orders, and you will see when Barack H. Obama went to Hiccupta, or what you call Egypt, he talked about the Treaty of Tripoli, talking about these very same things. And the deal of it is that this information was to be dispensed among the people at large at all cost. And this is, again, why you don't see them promoting the rights of indigenous people, which was also signed during that period of time, etc. And so the responsibility for the Aboriginal people to start taking charge of their own affairs is upon you now. And so therefore, a lot of things that you used to do is no longer necessary for you to do. You have no obligation to them. And the real deal, all obligations they had was to secure your rights. And they breached and breached and breached. And here we are today. And for the people who are just becoming awake, this is why we're telling you, get out of the gray area and have some comprehension of the actuality of the politics which are taking place today, and start taking responsibility and get with those people among you who are exercising right of reversion of estate. This is why over the years we've been teaching that, because we already knew that these people were in breach then, and we already suspected they would be in breach when the rest of the world start charging them to enforce Constitution and treaty. And so when you hear any of them talk about their democracy, you know that they're part of the misprission and the fraud. But you, the people of the land, must make the distinction between the republic and the democracy, because now you're being forced to choose sides, and know that that's what's before you right now.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing that. We apologize for all of the background noise, y'all. We can't, we're not in the soundproof booth, but we wanted to acknowledge. We left the list down there to give all of the appellations, and so
yes,
we wanted to talk about, because you mentioned that we're going to have to love, band together. You know, there's things that the folks are asking
on principle.
What do we do if the bank's closed? Somebody says, "How do we get paid?" Da, da, da.
You ain't.
I know we ain't never been paid, but the thing of it is, this weekend passed. We put out a call to action, or we ask, if you will.
Do you have the list? Did you bring the list over?
It's down the street for volunteers. We're gonna acknowledge it. I'm gonna do it on a page,
and please post it.
So some of you are in the chat right now, but I just want to talk, if you can share about the weekend and what took place, because we didn't expect to get the level of professionalism that actually came. We thought we'd have a lot more helpers and a lot less folks that were able to work independently and competently. And we got that. So we want to say thank you. We formed a bond that, by the time, it actually went an extra day. Some of the folks were here until the Monday, and I was so sad to see them go, because I just got used to everybody.
Oh yes, because like family.
So please, if you don't mind,
And we want to thank the brothers and sisters that came from around the country.
I mean, literally.
Many of them literally flew in.
Yes.
To help us. Many traveled by conveyance to help, etc., and contributed to many of the repairs that were necessary at the House of Reawakening Mind 602. And we're thankful because we had very highly skilled people dealing with both electric, floor installation, and general construction. And we had many sisters that came and painted, etc.
We even had holistic.
And holistic chef.
Massages,
let me tell you,
Reiki
we had
masters.
Translation. We had it going on, and we actually have a list of all the helpers and people contributed, and it's over at the house now. And next time when we come up, if you don't mind, we'll mention your appellations and thank you again,
and share some pictures with
share some pictures with us, etc., of the work that was done,
and of the workers we have.
Yes, and of the workers, etc. And thank you a lot. Can't be actually thanked enough. And so don't ever forget that we won't forget your honest and open-hearted help and assistance in us restoring the damages of at the building and a lot of unfinished work that needed to be done. We thank you wholeheartedly. Yes, we do.
Yes, we do. And we appreciate you. I'm just going to say we were a little bit no, Grand Sheik was cool as a cucumber, but yours truly had a meltdown before we went live because it seems like every time we get ready to do this, and we've been doing on 2 different computers, we get a some type of interference, and so we could not do that today. And I'm just grateful that we were able to come back and do it the old way and still have you do what you're doing. And again, for those of you who are wondering why you haven't heard about the Zoom classes yet, what we've been doing is amassing the list of those of you who are interested in being a part of the Zoom classes. Like I said, I didn't say give me your email address. I just said text Zoom, but we literally needed to have your appellation and your email address. Once the classes are established, we will be sending out notifications to you all, and it'll be first come, first serve. We think we may have to increase, our capacity on Zoom to be able to accommodate all of you who have actually requested, because I think we're limited to 100, what the subscription we have, and we have way more than 100. But we appreciate that, and as soon as we are ready, you will get notification. Secondly, the war that you see, the women are ready. Sisters, please text your name or your appellation and your email address and the word WAR, which stands for Women Are Ready. We have some work to do. There are some things that we want to be able to get together and do in the spirit realm to change, to turn some of this stuff around, because the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. And so we just want to say, let us get together and do what we came here to do. We need to come together, and one of the things I wanted to say, just for a little bit of, and I don't know what the movie's going to be like, but I would just recommend that all sisters that can go and see Woman King. Let's build ourselves up. Just let that be our prerequisite. If you can get out to see the Woman King, go in groups if you can, and let's see. I think it will help, Grand Sheik, with just giving a boost to our strength and our confidence of who we are. And so if you can go see that, I think it's like the 16th or something of this month. Please go out and see that, and let's join in the fact that the women are ready. Shout out to our sister, Dr. Kia Pruitt. We appreciate her to the utmost for the work that she's doing, and the shout out that she gave to Grand Sheik and myself today. We had a wonderful build with her, and we're going to be doing some other things, with her, and she's doing the work. Am I right?
Yes, she's doing the work.
She's learned.
More women need to come out and do the work, because keep in mind, even though they have suppressed the information and don't teach civics, proper government is a matriarchy by nature. Nativity and nationality are conjoined. And we're not talking about the corpse or the dead. Because remember, the principle of true civilization is principled on the principle of the divine law of the God of the living and not of the dead. Keep that in mind.
Absolutely.
That's very important.
Absolutely.
And that women are in fact the Stargate.
Again, we thank you. Love you too, Dr. Kia. I didn't even know you were on the live, but we appreciate you. Thank you so much. You all, we are going to go. Yours truly is completely tired, and I know Grand Sheik probably is, and but we thank you. I'll be back on with office hours. I think I'm supposed to be on next week. Don't have a guest as of yet, but somebody will be on with me. Somebody will be on with me. So we thank you. We appreciate you. And until next time, like I said, we appreciate your love and your support. And it was pretty good in the chat today. I may have missed something. We love you too. We love you too. We appreciate everybody who comes on here. Share this video. Share it. I may have got a little passionate at the end, Grand Sheik, because I'm listening to you read all these things.
Well, you already know
that was supposedly had taken place 9 years ago, and instead.
And then look at this. Look at this, Doc.
Instead of them doing anything,
now,
it's like they did the
but look at
opposite.
this. Look at this, Doc. Look at this. Remember, and as a matter of fact, when we come on again, we're going to share with you the non-pro-tunc document that was issued from Philadelphia chambers around 1985, right after they bombed our brothers and sisters in Philadelphia, dealing with these same issues. And we presented that information even then, documented from Philadelphia chambers. And the so-called Black and Indian leaders in the community did not share that information with the people. We're going to share that with you. But the major principle of why we're having this conversation is to get the stragglers to recognize that they're not part of the corporation and stop consenting and don't keep expecting them to do right. This is another reason, just like the doc said, they've honored nothing. So why do we have to keep telling these people to nationalize? Because the nationalization is the reclaim of a state. Look up what nationalization is in the political forum. It is the tribes and the natural people reclaiming their estate. That's really what it is. It's not just correction of history. It's not just correction of tribal names and appellations. It's the restoration of your lost estate. Please study.
All right.
And have a grand evening.
We thank you. We appreciate you. We out of here, Grand Sheik.
You here, we.
The deeper and deeper I go, I find what it is I should know. 'Cause it's just a matter of time that you'll reawaken your mind. Oh, come with me, come to know and find out what is truth. Then you'll know what's in store just for you. No more living a lie. I can look to the sky and say, I'm reawakening minds. Come to know and find out what is truth, yes. Then you know what's in store just for you. No more living a lie. I can look to the sky and say, I'm reawakening minds.